Welcome to Leading Change. So leaders enable change in themselves, in their colleagues, teams, organizations and circumstances. Sometimes, just sometimes, things need to stay the same more or less. But in large part, things are changing, and that's what leaders do when they're leading change. They work with that, they lead it. Well, you may know by now that extraordinary leadership, we start with leading yourself. That for us is the basis of leadership. If you can't bring yourself to the moment, how can you lead? We then, on the basis of that, look at how we work with others and enable them to be led, to move, to shift. And then to how we lead teams and organizations and affect the stakeholders, the community, customers, others. So that's our approach at Extraordinary Leadership, starting with leading yourself. And it's that we bring to leading change in terms of shape. So we'll be starting with how you lead change in yourself. Then to how you enable others to change, one-to-one, colleagues. Then to how you enable change in teams, to shift a team from one place to another. Then change in organizations and change more broadly, even beyond what you can directly affect. So there's a hierarchy, a cascade, a process, if you like, in the following sections in this program. We'll start with some things that are perhaps uniform about change, that apply in all of those situations. We'll provide something of a framework. So when we think about change, we notice that change is always happening. Every day you're different, even subtly. Every day I'm different. Every day the weather's different. Every day things have shifted. Change never stops. Day to day, month to month, season to season, year to year. Technologies are shifting. Social environments are changing. Economies are moving. Polities are changing too. So we know that change is a constant. Fine. You knew that already. When someone comes to you and says, we're going to make some changes around here, what comes up for you? What happens? We're going to make some changes. What's the response? Where is it? Where is it physically, emotionally, psychologically? What kicks off in your head when someone says, change is happening? If you're like most human beings, you'll have some negatives, some limiting, maybe a tightening. Well, fears of one kind or another. Someone's going to make some changes. What will that mean? How will that affect me? What will happen here? So fears come up. You may or may not regard fear as natural. You might regard it as inevitable. Fears are there. In addition to fears, of course, we have hopes. In most instances anyway. If we're dealing with people who have positive intent and they're about to propose something, we have the possibility of hope. Leaders always offer, in the context of change, hopes of one kind or another. They have to be there. So we have hopes and we have fears about potential and potentially different futures. What does the future hold for you? What does it hold for your team? Hopes and fears. That applies to self, to team, to organizations, to everything. When we think about the present moment, we also have things that are negative and positive. We have what we can call dissatisfiers about the present. I wish it weren't like this. This is not sustainable, or this needs to be better. All of that, dissatisfiers, is what we'll call them. And we have satisfiers. Well, I'm quite comfortable with this and that. I like the way that this goes. I'm connected with these people. I don't want that to change. So if we look at this now as a simple 2x2 with the present on the left and the future on the right, and negatives in the bottom half and positives in the top half, you'll see that we can think about dissatisfiers and satisfiers in the present, and we think about fears and hopes in the future. Pulling these out, articulating and understanding them, can help us to address change at a series of different levels. So think about this little change matrix. You can think of any kind of change at any level and begin to pull some things out in each of those different areas. And I'm going to encourage you to do that, whether you take something for yourself personally, something within a team or organization, or something else. A proposed change, maybe one coming up. And in a few seconds, just to pause this program and complete by putting some things in each of the 4 squares of this simple matrix. So if you're ready, hit pause now. So the subject in front of us is leading change within yourself. And I want to persuade you here today that change within yourself is absolutely possible. My evidence is the amount of change that you've already been through. Some of it you initiated. In other instances, it may feel that it happened to you. Whatever the dynamic here, you've changed. You're simply not the same person you were 20 years ago. In some ways, you're different. You see the world differently. You're aware of things you weren't aware of. Physiologically, you're different. Emotionally, you may be different too. What's important to you may have shifted. So these changes have been happening to you. And if the future's like the past, will continue happening to you. In this part of the program, we want to look a little bit about some changes that have happened and that could happen. And I hope that you will have a bit more clarity about how that can happen and the changes you may like to see in the future. So we start by looking backwards a little. And I want to invite you to begin by thinking about, letting come to mind, 3 big changes that have happened in your life. 3 big changes. Whatever they might be, whether they're professional, whether they're personal, in your family, whether they're geographic in some way, whether they're to do with new people appearing in your life or people moving out of your life, additional responsibilities, whatever they might be. 3 big changes that have already happened in your life. So let them come to mind, and as they come to mind also, I want to invite you to think about, okay, what's the impact been of those changes on who you are now? So you might have an example. You moved jobs from one firm to another. You got this new position, maybe the one you're in now, and it opened up new possibilities for you and it's enabled you to. Or there could be something dramatic. There is for many people in our pasts a different change. So in a moment, I'm going to invite you to pause the module, give us a bit of time to reflect and think. 3 big changes in your life and the impact for each of them that's had on you and on the person you are today. The impact may be small or huge. Ready, steady, reflect. Pause now. Now you've got some sense of those which are all in your past and some awareness of the impacts that they may have had. I want to invite you to think about some people who've had an impact on you. We started just now with change as such. A big change happened. Let's think now about people who've had a big impact on you. Maybe your current boss or a previous boss. Maybe a teacher. maybe a family member who has had a positive impact, in other words, a change that's affected you, who's changed you and the person, helped to form the person you are now, apart from yourself, that is. So let them come to mind. It doesn't matter exactly maybe who they are, but just let them come to mind now. Who are they? Who are these people? Say it may be a teacher who believed in you, a family member. Mothers and fathers often have a big impact. Not always positive, of course, but there'll be positives in there. Teachers, colleagues, friends, whoever they are. Who are they? How did they do it? How did they do it? What was it? Was it something they said or something they did? Was it some example that they showed you or some direct communication? So what was it that they did? And as you think about that, as you let that come back, as you remember that, how did they do it? Was it some eye contact, some belief, something? Was it purely positive? Was it a little bit more kind of demanding of you? What was it? How did they do it that really hit you, reached something in you and had an impact on you? So whether there are 2, 3, 4, 5 examples, let them come to mind. Who was it? What did they do? How did they do it? And if this comes clear, if there was a message that they gave you, whether or not they gave you words, what was that message? So just as before, give yourself some time to reflect, to think, and to address those questions and see what comes up for you now. Okay. So we've now looked at 2 different kinds of change in your past, and we're going to look at a third before we come to the present and look towards the future. So the next kind of change in your past, personal change, is about changes you've decided to make in yourself, or you've wanted to make in yourself and you've made, or maybe wanted to make in yourself and maybe you haven't fully made. That's okay as well. So if you remember back, I don't know whether you ever make New Year's resolutions. They don't always work. Or if at some point you've decided, you know what, I'm really going to make a change here. I'm going to make a shift. I'm going to be a better person. I'm going to be more focused. I'm going to not get wound up about this stuff. I'm going to, whatever it is. You've decided or you've realized that you can make some change in yourself. You're going to be more disciplined. You're going to get on with it. Whatever that might be, at some point in your past, you may have decided to make some changes in yourself, to really work on change. Now, whether you were really successful in that or not, don't mind at the moment. Both cases are fine. But let, if you will, some instances come to mind. If, as you remember, you realize, wow, I've never tried to make any changes in myself, then that's also interesting. And shortly we'll come to making changes for the future. If you realize, wow, I've really worked on this and I haven't really got anywhere yet, then I salute you for working on it. That's fine. And if there's some stuff where you've made some shifts, you know that these days you're calmer or more present, or you can laugh more, or you don't beat yourself up as much as you did. You know, I can think back to when I was a teenager and I used to really give myself a hard time for whatever it was. And I do that much less these days. For myself, and I'll just buy a bit of space for you here and share a little bit more, I used to get more worked up, worried, anxious, fretful than I do these days. A huge change. Well, I've had many years to work on this stuff and I'm familiar with great stuff, so I've got an advantage. But whatever it is, I want to invite you to pause for a third time and think about changes you've wanted to make in yourself. Some of them you've made a lot, some of them you might have made a little. Maybe there are none in those categories. Some of them you've wanted to and it hasn't shifted yet. That's okay. Up to 3 categories. What's the change you wanted to make? and how far have you got with it so far? That's the task. Give yourself some time, whether this is going to be 3 minutes or 3 hours, completely up to you. Give yourself some time to reflect and let this come up, and you may learn something about how you have and haven't been leading change in yourself.